Thank you, David. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Dottie Storer, and I'm joined this morning by Reverend Krista Taves, who will present today's service. Carol Glauser is our pastoral care person this morning. Please see her if you'd like to talk about pastoral challenges, personal challenges in your life. Eliot Unitarian Chapel is a liberal religious community of spiritual seekers. We welcome you in all the fullness of your age, race, ethnicity, your ways of being in body and mind, your gender expression, sexual orientation, and religious background. Our core values are freedom, reason, respect, and love. If you are with us for the first time, thank you for coming, especially on this cold day. We hope that you feel warmly welcomed and that today's service speaks to you. You may have received a guest form on your way in. It's also available through the QR code in the order of service and on the front page of our website. Please fill it out, both sides if you have kids, so we can stay in touch. Please join us for coffee hour in Adams Hall after the service and online at 1 p.m. Subscribe to our weekly email for a link to our Zoom coffee hour. The flaming chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. We light a chalice when we meet to signify that we are entering sacred space. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals. Please stand as you're willing and able for our first hymn, Morning Has Come, number 1000 in the Teal Book. As a free congregation, we promise to one another our mutual trust and support. To create beloved community, we promise to be kinder to each other than we have to be. to listen fully to each other with an open mind and heart, to speak responsibly and respectfully, to find ways to improve our church for all members and friends. Now Tanya Hall will present a special announcement from the Ministerial Search Committee.
Do the kids want to come up and sit up here? Hang out. Here, I'll sit down here with you. Good morning. My name is Tanya. I'm a member of the Ministerial Search Team.
Oh, hello.
Okay. Today is a very important day because we're going to share with you who the search team has chosen as the candidate to be our next lead minister. This is really important for all of us because here at Eliot Chapel and at all other Unitarian Universalist congregations, we decide who will be our minister. No one else tells us. We on the search team have been carefully listening to the ideas and the hopes and the dreams of everyone here about what we like about Eliot Chapel and what we want to do differently or more of. And based on all of that listening, we are sure that Reverend Krista, who we all know since she's been with us for more than 3 years, is the right person to be our next settled minister. What does it mean when we say settled minister? A settled minister is someone the congregation chooses through a vote. In voting to call Reverend Krista, we're making a commitment to her ministry because we believe it is right and good for us. And in turn, Reverend Krista, when she accepts our call, will make a commitment to us to minister to us and to be our pastor. That means she leads us in making our congregation truly a family where we can all feel at home and cared for. And we do service and social justice in the community in the way we believe in our hearts is right. We're not going to vote today to call Reverend Krista. That vote will happen on March 3rd. That day, we will have a congregational meeting after services. Between now and then, there'll be many opportunities to talk with Reverend Krista, opportunities for questions and conversation about our decision to call her. Especially, we have planned in a couple weeks for Reverend Krista to be with you guys, with our RE children and youth, just to talk just to you guys. And we'll include your parents too in their own meeting, and everyone else in meetings at different times and with all our teams and groups. The first opportunity is next Saturday at the Bergfried warm-up. Now, I know you'd like to hear a few words from Reverend Krista.
Hi. I am so thrilled. And it kind of figures that when the candidacy of a Canadian minister is announced, it is a cold Arctic blast. I promise I did not bring this. Never in a million years would I have thought, just a few years ago, that I would be considered for the lead minister of Eliot Chapel. 3 years ago, actually almost 4 years ago now, Reverend Barbara brought me here as a supporting minister. And I loved being a supporting minister. I loved the teams I worked with. I loved the people. Even though it was the middle of the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic when I started, April of 2020, and I only saw most of you online for 18 months, I loved it. And so when Barbara let me know she was retiring, I was like, oh, well, what does this mean for me? I wasn't expecting it. And then the question was asked, well, if the board or the search team would invite you to be the candidate, would you say yes? And doing what I always do, I started looking for support. I contacted my mentors, my friends, my family, other UU ministers who've been inside candidates like I might be, to see, what did they think? And I had all my questions like, could I do this? Did I have the skills for this? Could I learn the skills for this? Was this the right place to be at this time in my ministry? But the biggest question was, did I love this congregation? And the answer was yes. Yes, I do love this congregation and I love the people. So when Claire Weineken, last year's president of the board, called me and said, would you consider staying for a year? And while we consider you as our inside candidate, I said yes, that I would be very happy to do that. And so here we are today. And in the next 6 weeks, I'm going to talk to as many people as possible before the vote on March 3rd. And you'll be interviewing me, and I'll also be interviewing you, just to let it goes both ways. And I'm really looking forward to March 3rd. So thank you to the search committee, thank you to the board, and thank you to all of you. Let's have a great 6 weeks.
Thank you, Reverend Krista. Now the children can go to Ari. We'll sing the children out.
So I invite us now to join in a time of prayer and meditation as you are willing and able. Our meditation today is called In-Betweenness by Reverend Michelle LaGrave, for we are in an in-between place right now, between now and April 3rd. March 3rd. So I invite you to be comfortable in whatever position allows you to feel centered and grounded. Take a few deep breaths in and out. In and out. One more time. In and out. We, you and I, are in between right now. In between what was and what will be. In between who we were and who we will become. In between letting go and embracing. In between saying hello and saying goodbye. In-betweenness, it's a thing. In-betweenness is a time of fullness, a time of anticipation, a time of hope, a time of worry, a time of sadness. In between is a time of waiting, waiting for news, waiting for departure, waiting for arrival, waiting for death. In betweenness is a time of transformation, a time of reflection, a time of action, a time of growing, a time of becoming. During this time of in-betweenness, of knowing and not knowing, let us enter into the silence together. Let us speak the names of those we would hold in care. In the spirit of that love that knows no bounds, that love that connects all that is, this we pray. Amen and blessed be. I invite you to remain seated for our meditative hymn, 1009, Meditation on Breathing.
So this one's going to require a little bit of instruction. So we're going to start with the drone. We're going to go through that twice, and then we'll come in with the melody. Stick with whichever part feels right to you. There's no wrong answers here. And then after we've run through the melody at least once, then people can start coming in with the descant.
Eliot Chapel shares our offering with organizations that do important work in the community that further the values of this congregation. In January, we're sharing our offering with Meacham Park Neighborhood Improvement Association and Horizons St. Louis. Is Harriet Patton here? Oh, she's only coming to the second service, okay. She is the president of the Meacham Park Neighborhood Improvement Association. We have supported this organization for many years, and with a member of Eliot Chapel on the board of the organization, Meacham Park Neighborhood Improvement Association. The organization sponsors scholarships, sponsors a Martin Luther King Day celebration, which is tomorrow at Kirkwood High. And I invite you to be a generous people while giving the offering. The ushers, please come forward. Will the greeters please come forward with the offering? We dedicate the offering for its important work by joining in the dedication of gifts printed in your order of service. To the work of the church, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives, and these are offerings. Today, we are celebrating Martin Luther King, the powerful civil rights leader of the 1960s, whose leadership changed America. But the question before us is, which Martin Luther King are we celebrating? And this brings us to our reading, which is The Radical King We Don't Know by Cornel West. The FBI transcript of a June 27, 1964 phone call conversation reveals Malcolm X receiving a message from Martin Luther King Jr. supporting getting the Human Rights Declaration of the United Nations to expose the treatment of black people in America. Malcolm X replied that he was eager to meet Martin Luther King Jr. If they had met that day and worked together, the radical King would be well known. In a speech to staff in 1966, King explained, "There must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism." If he had lived and pursued this project, the radical King would be well known. On April 4, 1968, in Memphis, the last day of his life, Martin Luther King Jr. phoned Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta with the title of his Sunday sermon, "Why America May Go to Hell." If he had preached this sermon, the radical King would be well known. Yet, just prior to King's death, 72% of whites and 55% of blacks disapproved of his opposition to the Vietnam War and his efforts to eradicate poverty in America. When much of the black leadership attacked or shunned him, King replied, "What you're saying may get you a foundation grant, but it won't get you into the kingdom of truth." Although much of America did not know the radical King, the FBI and U.S. government did. They called him the most dangerous man in America. They knew Reverend King was a revolutionary Christian, sincere in his commitment and serious in his calling. They knew he was a product of a black prophetic tradition, full of fire in his bones, love in his heart, light in his mind, and courage in his soul, who dared to organize and mobilize black rage. Does America have the capacity to hear and heed the radical King? Or must America sanitize King in order to evade and avoid this challenge?
If the words I said were the words that I meant, would the world be a different place? When I try to say what I mean to say, It's not quite what I wanted, and so I ask for forgiveness. I ask for grace. I ask for understanding to help me begin again. If the songs I sung were the songs I meant, would the world be a different place? When I try to sing what I mean to sing, it's not quite what I hoped for. And so I ask for forgiveness. I ask for grace. I ask for understanding to help me begin again. Love I give was the love I meant, would the world be a different place? When I try to love how I mean to love, it's not quite what I yearned for. And so I ask for forgiveness. I ask for grace. I ask for understanding to help me begin again. Spirit of life, shower me with forgiveness. Spirit of hope, shower me with grace. Spirit of truth, shower me with understanding. Spirit of love, shower me with trust. The words that I said, the songs that I sing, the love that I give will help me begin again. The words that I said, the song that I sung, the love that I gave would help me begin again.
Thank you, Melinda. It's the first time I've heard someone else sing a song I wrote. It's very beautiful. I wrote that song, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and I was in a really difficult ministry, and I was questioning myself a lot. Like, was I doing the right thing? Was I being a good leader? Was I living the love that I wanted to live? And that song was a way of expressing those feelings and working through those thoughts and just trying to find my way. And when I think about Martin Luther King, he was always ready to begin again, right? He was so courageous that he would try something even if there was absolutely no guarantee that it was going to go where he wanted it to go, because he was so firm in his heart. And I envied his courage. And I wanted to have that kind of clarity and courage. And so I wrote that song. And, it was also, I think it's also important that I share that my relationship with Martin Luther King really didn't start until I moved to the United States. I'm from Canada, and although we, respected Martin Luther King and we valued him, he wasn't part of our civics education. We had different civics education. And it was like his story wasn't really our story. It was an American story. But then I moved from Canada to the United States, and my first congregation was in New Orleans. I was the interim minister there from 2004 to 2005. And the leaders of that congregation let me know in no uncertain terms that if I was going to survive and succeed as a UU minister in this country, I needed to understand what systemic racism looked like in the United States. And I needed to learn and feel that that was also my responsibility and that I needed to become part of the struggle in some way. Otherwise, I might as well go back to Canada. And I was very thankful for their candor. It was intimidating. It was a little shocking, and I wasn't expecting that when I went down to New Orleans. I didn't know what to expect being a UU minister in Canada, but I took them at their word. And I started reading and watching documentaries and doing anti-racism training and seeking guidance from mentors, wondering how I was going to do my part. And I would often talk to my mom about what I was learning. You know, my mom and I are really good friends. We sometimes talk many times a week. And one day I asked her, I said, "Do you remember where you were when Martin Luther King was assassinated?" And she got this tone in her voice that I don't hear very often from her, and I can't even describe. She would have been 20 years old at the time. My dad was 21. They had just married the previous fall, and on that day, they had decided to go on a date to the Detroit Zoo. The community where I grew up is less than an hour from the Canadian-American border. And it wasn't unusual for us to go to Detroit for concerts, shopping, fine dining, cheap beer, museums and galleries, and the zoo. And it was an overcast, warm April day, unseasonably warm April day, and they wandered the zoo and they had a nice dinner, and then they prepared to cross back into Canada on the Ambassador Bridge. There are two ways to cross the border in Windsor, Detroit. There's the tunnel, which links the two downtowns, and then the Ambassador Bridge, which empties on both sides into more of an industrial area. And they took the Ambassador Bridge. And when they pulled up to the Canadian Border Guard and gave them their ID, he looked at them real oddly and he said, "You were in Detroit today? Good thing you chose the bridge and not the tunnel. Do you have any idea what's going on?" "No," they said. And he continued, "You are lucky you got across. When you get out of here, look at the Detroit skyline and turn on your radio." And as they pulled out, they looked back at the Detroit skyline and saw flames beginning to engulf the downtown core. And they turned on the radio, and that's how they found out that Martin Luther King had been killed and that people were taking to the streets. And when my mom shared this, I realized that this story was much closer to me than I'd ever thought. We all live on the strands of a radically interdependent web of life. And my mom's story brought into relief what was true then and now. Nothing is separate. Everything is connected from our personal lives to the wider world. To say that Martin Luther King was a huge personality is a dramatic understatement. He was charismatic, he was smart, he was bold, he was dangerous, he was passionate, and his message of love and liberation drew you in, and you would do just about anything that he asked. I wonder how many of the people who joined him ever imagined themselves marching, chanting, making signs, gathering petitions, attending meetings, registering voters, and engaging in peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience that could land them in jail. He had the ability to lift a whole community's sense of worth and dignity and channel the faith that love would ultimately prevail and that they would be free into that community until they felt like it belonged to them. There is no doubt that Martin Luther King's leadership is a huge part of why we have the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and why white supremacist movements continue to try to undermine them. But by the time he died in 1968, the coalition he helped shape was struggling to hold together. He had always faced hatred from most whites. That was just a given. But now he was losing ground in the black community, and there were all kinds of reasons for that. First, the black empowerment movement was gaining strength. In King's vision, liberation was when people of all races might live together in peace. His activism was as much for whites as it was for blacks, because he believed no one was free when there was oppression. No one was free. And so he saw this as a partnership that was about healing throughout society. So his liberation for all he was determined to work with whites in achieving that harmony, determined. But the Black empowerment movement had given up any hope that equality could ever exist between black and white. All the evidence showed that racism just evolved and changed shape with every advance of civil rights. So the Black empowerment movement's younger leaders were out of patience. For them, liberation meant separate, autonomous black communities, separate from white society, created and protected by violence if need be. To them, King was old-fashioned and he was naive. So that was one of the forces challenging his vision. And then King himself went beyond advocating for just black liberation, and he added ending poverty, protesting the Vietnam War, and establishing democratic socialism as part of the path of liberation and love for everyone. Other black leaders said he had taken his eye off the prize, and he said, no, liberation cannot happen for anyone, including our own people, when there is poverty, when our country spends billions on war instead of its people, and when our government services serves the high and mighty, not the common person. And then to top it off, the FBI and the US government were always behind the scenes, undermining the work. Always. And all this was happening when King was murdered on the day that my parents went to the Detroit Zoo. And since then, there has been a cultural struggle over how Martin Luther King is remembered. Black leaders today are telling us over and over again that MLK's image has been watered down so that no one is offended. And his style of leadership has been simplified as a way to disempower current black leaders from being taken seriously. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. So when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and Black Lives Matter, which had formed when Trayvon Martin was killed in Florida, Black Lives Matter had a very diffuse leadership structure. They didn't want a central person at the head of the movement. They worked collaboratively and collectively, and they believed it helped them be as nimble as possible, but it also mirrored their theology and ideology of radical collaboration. But people would look at the Black Lives Matter movement, even people who strongly supported the civil rights movement, and say, hey, where's your Martin Luther King? We need there to be a Martin Luther King. And because it didn't look like the 1960s civil rights movement, they delegitimized it. They said it wasn't real. They said it was just a bunch of kids making trouble in the streets. When instead it was a very radical form of collaborative, shared leadership. And yes, there were struggles in the Black Lives Matter movement. There still are today. And this diffuse leadership remains difficult for many to understand. So for instance, when in Britain, a Black Lives Matter group used a slogan that is associated with the Palestinian people and the erasure of Israel, people thought the whole Black Lives Matter movement believed that thing. And it wasn't true, because every group speaks for itself. There is no central unifying understanding except that equality and equity must be foremost in our minds and our actions. But how that happens and how they make that, it's a local decision amongst a collective of leaders. So any one person cannot speak for the Black Lives Matter movement, whereas Martin Luther King could speak for the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So by elevating his leadership as the epitome of what black civil rights should look like, it disempowered the leaders today, who were also very dangerous, very radical, and highly committed. Now, I'm telling you this because we are in a time when our country is again struggling with what it means to be a leader and what kind of leaders we want and the leaders we actually need. And it's not always the same thing. Wants and needs are not the same thing. And we're about to enter primary season tomorrow, and we'll close off the year with a general election. So the question of leadership is all around us. Now, in Unitarian Universalism,
The purpose of leadership, any leadership, is to release more love as a tool of liberation into the world, because love is the only thing that can liberate us. Now, before you dismiss this as just some new agey drivel, which I actually did when I first heard it, the love we talk about isn't, that romantic spark of romantic love, Hallmark love, where you ride off into the sunset. There is no sunset. This kind of love is way more than that. Love is not necessarily even a feeling. It's an action. It's a commitment. Are we acting with love? Are we creating love through our choices? Are more people liberated because of the choices we make as leaders in the spirit of liberating love? It's a systemic idea, love is. Not to diminish romantic love, not to diminish the love between two people, but that love has to become much, much larger. If there isn't love, there isn't liberation for anyone. I love the quote from Bell Hooks. The moment we choose love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. That action is a testimony of love as the practice of freedom. And as you've learned today, I am the candidate to be your next lead minister. And I've combed through all the notes from Interim Minister Reverend Dr. Doug Watkins, who met with as many members as possible last year. And I've combed through the report of the search team about what they learned from you this fall. And you were asked, what kind of leader do you want? And I'm reading in between the lines to see what kind of leadership you believe opens the path to liberating love. And the question is always in front of us. What kind of leaders do we want? What kind of leaders do we need? Most of us are leaders in some place in our lives, whether we're a manager or a shift leader or a business owner or a CEO. Teachers are leaders. Parents are leaders. Healthcare professionals are leaders. Law enforcement are leaders. This congregation has many, many leaders. What kind of leader are you? What kind of leader are you? We all have leaders that we respect and leaders that we struggle with. It could be the decisions they make. It could be how they make their decisions. It could be the way they make us feel when they make their decisions. People will generally support a leader even if they don't always like their decisions, because they respect the leader, because the leader considers their viewpoint, treats them with respect, has inner integrity, and is consistent in their values. And if they make a mistake, which they will, they own it, they try to course correct, they try to begin again. When we look at Martin Luther King's leadership, there are things I would love to model, but there are also things I'm not so sure about. His model depended on charismatic leadership where one person represents the movement, and that's a vulnerable model. The higher a pedestal is, the further the fall. And if you lose that one person, where are you? And we see what happened when he was assassinated. It was chaos, because one person was not strong enough to hold it together. Just recently, a movie was released about Bayard Rustin. Have any of you watched the movie Rustin yet? I highly, highly recommend it. Rustin was one of King's advisors and one of his closest friends. And he was part of the inner leadership that advised King, that guided King. King wasn't just a Lone Ranger. He had a wide group of people from behind that supported him, that questioned him, that guided him, that educated him. And Rustin was an incredible organizer. He was the brains. He was the organizing potential that moved King forward. King was successful in the way he was because of Rustin. He was connected to so many influential people, and he was unwavering in his commitment to radical social justice. He actively empowered people to become leaders because he believed that his mind wasn't enough. So he brought good people onto his projects and created a culture of permission where he gave room for initiative and creativity, all the while making sure that everyone remained on course. He was always open to reaching a goal by a different path than he had imagined. And that's what made him so good. But when it was discovered that he had been arrested in a gay bar raid, King dropped him. Something Rustin couldn't have imagined because they were such good friends. He even went in with his resignation, expecting King to refuse it. But he accepted it. You know, King was also a Baptist minister in the 1960s when being gay was illegal. He thought of the damage an association with his dear friend could do to the movement, and he decided to cut Rustin loose. And we watch in the movie how Rustin is flattened by this betrayal. It took years to painstakingly build up his own self-confidence, to believe in his own leadership again, and then to decide to work on getting back in with King and other civil rights leaders to get on board as he masterminded the March on Washington with the goal of making it as uncomfortable as possible for President Kennedy to go lukewarm on the proposed Civil Rights Act. King and Rustin were reunited. There was forgiveness. There was the acceptance of that forgiveness. But once again, the powers that be tried to damage King's reputation, again with accusations about Rustin. So King got to have a do-over. What would he do this time? And this time, when the accusations made the front page news, he stood by his friend and publicly said there was no way he would let these accusations, which were intended to defame the civil rights movement, get in the way. Rustin was a good man, he was a moral man, he was a loving man, and Rustin was staying. Pretty good call, because the March on Washington is exactly what created the momentum for the passing of the Civil Rights Act. Good leaders definitely make mistakes, but they own them, and they try to learn from them to become better leaders. Good leaders also balance how much you push your people beyond their comfort zone and when it's time to pull back and make sure your relationships are intact. Good leaders know when to lead and when to follow. A good leader knows their job is not to make people happy. It's really not. Otherwise, you're always chasing approval, which is a sign of insecurity and will keep you from making strong decisions. And a good leader isn't afraid of making mistakes. They're not afraid of learning from them either. Martin Luther King had to dance that line all the time. Every leader does. I know you do as well, in the places in your life where you are a leader. So the question is then, how do we lead with love? Not that Hallmark love, but the kind of love that casts a vision, that is restless and hungry for true liberation for everyone. The only kind of love that is worth holding on to is the love that liberates. And this is what King was always trying to hold. And what he was holding when he tried to begin again with his dear friend Rustin. And this is also the love that we are called to offer and receive from each other. In a way, it's not right to say that good leaders lead with love. Good leaders allow themselves to be led by love and invite others to follow. That's how leaders remember that really it is never about us. It is always about the vision that calls us. So as we look forward to March 3rd, the day that the members of this congregation will vote on whether to call me, let us remember to center love in our conversations, a liberating love that always asks us to look beyond. Let's be open with each other, open to learning from each other, open to listening and sharing deeply. Let's lean into the questions instead of forcing answers. I'll close with words by Martin Luther King from Strength to Love. Love is the most durable power in the world. This creative force is the most potent instrument available in our quest for peace and security. May it be so. Thank you. I invite you to rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn number 1014, Answering the Call of Love.
We extinguish this chalice, put out the light of
Truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And let us be seated for one final musical gift.
People say to me, oh, you gotta be crazy. How can you sing in times like these? Don't you read the news? Don't you know the score? How can you sing when so many others grieve? People say to me, what kind of fool believes that a song will make a difference in the end? By way of a reply, I say a fool such as I, who thinks a song is somewhere to begin. A song is somewhere to begin. The search for something worth believing in. If changes are to come, there are things that must be done, and a song is somewhere to begin. People say to me, "Oh, you gotta be crazy. How can you love in times like these? Don't you read the news? Don't you know the score? How can you love when so many others grieve?" People say to me, "What kind of fool believes that love will make a difference in the end?" By way of a reply, I say a fool such as I, who thinks love is somewhere to begin. And love is somewhere to begin. The search for something worth believing in. If changes are to come, there are things that must be done, and love is somewhere to begin. People say to me, "Oh, you gotta be crazy. How can you dream in times like these? Don't you read the news? Don't you know the score? How can you dream when so many others grieve?" People say to me, "What kind of fool believes that a dream will make a difference in the end?" By way of a reply, I say a fool such as I, who thinks a dream is somewhere to begin. A dream is somewhere to begin. The search for something worth believing in. If changes are to come, there are things that must be done, and a dream is somewhere, and love is somewhere, and a song is somewhere to begin.
Thank you, Melinda. It's wonderful having you here today. Thank you for blessing us with your presence. See you next week, and go in peace.